Now, in Syria, let's just, briefly, and honestly, this is sort of like with some other topics, save the conspiracy theorizing. You can IM, but I guess I'll read Joseph Ballin. He's in a special insane IMs exemption program. He gets read.
Ballin is token tanky.
Yeah, Ballin, yes. So tankies are repped on the show. So there's no room. Our token TT is already repped, token tanky. So in 2011, there was an organic uprising in Syria. And there was good reason for it, because in spite of what some people would tell you, Bashar al-Assad basically was presiding over a authoritarian state that went back to his father's sort of ring of power and dictatorship, which destroyed the left. It actually specifically targeted and jailed many leftists. Was all of the sort of typical repression of an authoritarian regime. Okay, but at the same time, when he came into power, was also quite aggressive about implementing neoliberal reforms and sort of liberalizing things. He actually, in his first phase of power, would have been very similar to what Gamal Mubarak would have been, Hosni Mubarak's son, who was was set before Mubarak was forced out to inherit the throne from his dad, and obviously continue on an authoritarian thing, but had also trained, I believe, in the United States and had a finance background and was quite eager to privatize state assets and, create new market opportunities for foreign direct investors and to spread money around his friend circles. There's an uprising. Assad crushes it. Then the CIA, the Saudis, the Emiratis, they do their usual thing, which is that they fund dangerous Salafist groups. There's no doubt about that. That's real. The Obama administration is actually pretty disengaged. Congress and the UK Parliament won't go forward with airstrikes after the infamous crossing of the Red Line. There's a deal with Russia to contain the chemical weapons. And then in 2014, ISIS comes along, and that changes the whole metric of the focus of that situation. And the first bombings of ISIS began in Iraq because ISIS was actually picking up serious territory in Iraq. So spinning out of that, basically, you get, on a positive sense, you get support for the Kurds. The Kurds already had some organization to work out of because they had more autonomy than any other groups in Syria. The PKK moved in and around in Syrian Kurdish territory. Part of the reason is that Assad, basically thought, like, sure, if the PKK wants to come in here and organize people to go back in and mess with Turkey, great, no problem. And the same reason that he released, jihadis from his own prisons and sent them into Iraq. He was quite happy to outsource problems regionally. And, we've been in this situation now for several years where, Assad, along with, backing from Russia and Iran, is, committing any number of atrocities and crimes on a daily basis, including things that have nothing to do with all these disputes about chemical weapons, which I won't relitigate. They've killed hundreds of thousands of people regardless of that specific use of specific weapons. Then you have, Salafist terrorist groups that have been backed by the United States and the Gulf, and anybody that isn't a Syrian Sunni is rightly terrified of them, and that makes complete sense. And then you have some autonomy with the Kurds. So it's a complicated, terrible situation. It doesn't require any conspiracy theorizing. And potentially, if the United States had been serious in the beginning, and if other stakeholders have been serious in the beginning, Russia, Iran, Saudis, United States, in seriously forcing through some type of diplomatic process, as has been happening in parallel in Geneva, but never achieving anything because all sides basically thought they could win a war. So they let the war prolong. But if there was a serious diplomatic process, we might see some type of, I think it would actually look fairly similar, but reformed government that would have some representation of opposition. So the point is, it's very complicated. But there's one man that has never met a money-making opportunity or bombing campaign that he has thought is complicated. And that is, of course, a guy whose shamelessness makes Donald Trump look like a Buddhist monk, Tony Blair, weighing in on what he thinks about, there's a lot of consequences for many things. I can do random, bizarre thought experiments as well.
If you put the other point of view and you say, well, let's suppose we do nothing, then you really are giving carte blanche to the regime to do whatever is necessary to retake opposition areas by force.
But the fact is they're winning anyway.
They are winning, but they're winning because their outside backers are prepared to intervene and to commit. And frankly, we have not been able to. Now, this...
Oh, because we don't want to go to war with Russia.
Well, it's not just about going to war with Russia. It's because of the difficulties of intervention. As we know, as I know, it's extremely difficult. But the problem is non-intervention is also a policy with consequence.
Iraq
shows you that intervening is extremely difficult. But non-intervention, as we see from Syria, is also extremely difficult.
So basically, okay, so Tony Blair, and he's actually right in a certain way. There was such a public reaction in the UK and even a fair amount of public reaction in the United States because Tony Blair and George Bush, and I guess actually let's occasionally throw in John Howard from Australia and Aznar from Spain, pushed through the, just the greatest crime, catastrophic, lie-based, unnecessary, stupid, mass death intervention imaginable in Iraq on everything from disingenuous concerns about human rights to hyped and distorted intelligence. So now people are pretty rightly concerned about military involvement in the Middle East, even though there still is extensive military involvement in the Middle East. And then his conclusion from that, though, is because we have not, and by the way, we have supported actually very dangerous and problematic proxies in Syria, the type of proxies that are analogous to the proxies that we supported in Afghanistan in the 80s. And, that sort of didn't turn out too well in what people in the tech biz call the long tail. So now we're supposed to take from this that this catastrophe, of which there is no greater propagandist and implementer than Tony Blair, of which things like ISIS would not exist had it not been for that action. Now we're supposed to sit back and say yes, but the consequence of not also bombing even more civilians in Syria and not having our own proxy forces literally breathing down the necks of Iranian and Russian forces in Syria proves that, fucked up shit happens anyway. So guess we should bomb them. And this is the type of analysis that is still taken in many circles as serious people thought. You can kind of hear the disdain in that interviewer's voice because people in the UK loathe Tony Blair. People in the United States still listen to Tony Blair. And Tony Blair is certainly still well sought after and, at least until the very recent past, highly compensated by Central Asian dictatorships, Saudis, and the Chinese. And if you listen to that and you get past the sort of grave-sounding analysis, he's literally saying nothing. There are consequences to not driving drunk. You don't go a place as fast or as fun. Okay, yes, you're right, Tony. There are consequences.